All right. Yes. Hello, Deb. Hey, Karen. Hey, Peggy. Hey, all of y'all that are here today. Who else have we got here? We got DK. We got Stephanie. We got Audrey. So, welcome to Wake the Fuck Up Wednesday. Today, I wanted to talk about how to show up as our best selves when someone that we love has a mental illness. Because this shit is for reals, right? Right. Hey, Autumn, what's up? Um, so I grew up in a family that was pretty dysfunctional, like most of us, let's just admit, most of us, right? And so my mother had PTSD and she was physically abusive. My father had schizoaffective disorder, which is like schizophrenia and bipolar together. And growing up, I really, really loved them. I really, really wanted to feel safe with them. And I didn't always feel loved and I didn't always feel safe, right? And yet there was this internal struggle of wanting to be kind and compassionate and understanding, and then also like fucking feeling like I was going to lose my shit a lot of the time. And particularly when I was younger, and my father would do crazy shit. He would like we never owned a house as a kid because whenever we saved up enough, when my dad had a manic episode, he'd think we were super rich and just like give money away to like nonprofits, which sounds like this really kind thing to do, but it was actually his way of overspending when he was manic. So instead of like buying a house, he would like take the money and give it away. And so it was very interesting because my father was actually very kind. So even with his, severe mental illness, he would, like in his psychosis, do really kind things, but just really inappropriate kind things. Like he would invite, um, like, I would come home from school and then there would be like homeless people eating in our house, which I grew up in a really violent, dangerous neighborhood. Like you just didn't just invite strangers into your house, but he was trying to be kind, right? And like feed people. And anyway, um, and people that were like, scoping out our house to steal shit. And so I just wanted to say I understand the reality of how challenging it can be, right? So I'd love to hear if you can type in the chat box, like what challenges you tend to struggle with when with the person or persons you love that have been diagnosed with a mental illness. Now, I want to preface all of this with, you know, um, I've had depression. I've had postpartum depression. I had pretty severe seasonal affective disorder. Um, and I want to preface this with people that have a mental illness can live a very full and fulfilling and awesome life. Let's just say that. I also want to preface this with everything I'm talking about today can be used in any relationship, right? It's not like, oh, people with mental illness that we love cause problems for us and these are the things we can do. The things I'm sharing with you are things that we can do in any relationship that is challenging us. But I wanted to create this space specifically for our challenges for people we love that have a mental illness. So, one of the things when I was younger was I didn't understand my father's mental illness. So, like I was saying, he would do this crazy shit. He'd walk around the neighborhood naked, like our hood, not like our suburb, but like our hood, predominantly black hood. Because my dad had me when he was 50. So by the time I was a teenager, my old white dad would walk around the block naked and shit. And he would come to my high school to pick me up, before I could drive. And he would like act like a squirrel in the yard, in the, yeah, in the quad, I guess we would call it. And he would just say all kinds of shit when we were in public, if we tried to go watch a movie or go eat at a restaurant. So it was really challenging for me as a teenager because I was so confused about why he was doing these things. Like, why is he hurting me? Why is he embarrassing me? Or with my mother, like, why is she lashing out at me? Why is she hitting me? Right? And it was like she said she loves me, but why these things? And when I was 16 years old, I took a psychology class in high school, and I read about schizophrenia. And I was like, holy shit, uh, this is my dad, I think. So I took this book home to my mom and I said, Mom, look, I think dad has this schizophrenia, has schizophrenia. And we read it, and she said, oh my gosh, yes, I agree. And that alone, all of a sudden, gave both of us more patience with my dad, understanding that what he did was essentially out of his control, right? That he was doing the best he could, that he didn't want to hurt us in those ways. So that was a big shift, right? So one of the things we can do is really learn to understand that person we love, their mental health diagnosis, and what kinds of challenges do they have. You know, Ram Dass talks about how we can walk through a forest and we look around and we think like, oh, I understand why that tree is bending to the left or bending to the right, why that tree is growing that way. It's reaching for the light over there. The sunlight is shining through there. Or, oh, look at that tree is stunted. I can see why that tree is stunted, right? And when we are able to appreciate how a forest grows like that, you know, it's such a pleasant walk. We just look around and notice how the trees are different, and we think about why, and we can appreciate that. And he said, but we don't offer that same thing to our loved ones and to people, you know? Why can't we see someone and say, oh, like that? I can see this is what happened. And part of it is we don't know the whole story of someone, right? We don't know the whole story of what's going on when someone has a mental illness necessarily. But he said, I wish and I hope that I see people more as trees. So it's like, what if we gave people the benefit of the doubt that they're doing the best they could, and the way that they're showing up, there's a reason, a good reason, right? So I'm reading here, people are saying someone refuses to get a diagnosis, to get help. When I can't fix it, when it doesn't get better, no matter how much I give, and then I'm empty because I haven't gotten what I need, I get angry. Biting my tongue and not saying, get stuff done. Keeping patience that things will work out. And then Audrey's pointing to that comment, says, yes, how to set and hold boundaries when we also know the person can't help it, although sometimes they have tools they aren't using to, right? And middle child in transition to trans woman on multiple psych meds, and now 3 weeks into hormone replacement therapy. Daughter who's youngest may need further diagnostic intervention. Granddaughter, 22 months, displaying anger with hitting. I can't do shit, and I know that. So, you know, I want us all to remember that we are choosing to be in relationship. It may feel like we don't have a choice. Like, what? No, I have to do this. I have to be in this relationship. We actually don't. So I want to first offer you to be aware that I'm choosing to be involved in this relationship. And that's awesome. And we need to step out of, this victim mentality and realize I'm choosing to continue this relationship and take care of this person, right? Now, obviously, if you're a parent and you have a child, like you have like a sacred contract and other legal things that you can't abandon that child. But there are also people who've chosen to turf kids to other places, and I'm not saying that's necessarily the right thing to do. I'm just saying that we have to acknowledge that we are choosing to have this person in our life. And that's noble. I think that's noble, right? But when we think, oh, they're suffering more than me, I just need to buck up and show up for them, yada, yada, right? That dismisses our heart. It dismisses our suffering. So we need to be able to offer ourselves self-compassion, right? We need to offer ourselves self-compassion and say, I am suffering right now. So self-compassion practice is a huge part and the beginning part of any phase of loving someone. And especially, loving someone that has a mental illness that is creating unique challenges, right? So we start with acknowledging, I'm suffering, right? That's the mindfulness component of self-compassion. Oh, look, I'm suffering. And then we offer soothing words and touch. I like putting my hand over my heart, like, this is hard right now, Anna. Totally makes sense that this is hard. And then 3, self-kindness. What do you need right now, Anna? What can I do for you? Do I need to call a friend? Do I need to take a walk in the woods? Do I need to go for a swim in the ocean? What do I need to take care of myself right now? So self-compassion is a huge component of this. Karen's saying, I'm not going to be able to type my thoughts about this. That's okay, Karen. You're in Freedom School. So we can do that there. All right. So I'm just looking over the chat. I want to make sure I can address some of these things. So self-compassion, all right? Don't just try to buck up and get through it all and suck it up. We need to acknowledge that it's difficult and that it's hard and that there's suffering going on for us, right? Offer us a way to soothe ourselves, offer us kind words, acknowledgement of the suffering, and do something kind for ourselves. The other thing is we want to investigate our expectations, right? So we have someone that we have expectations for. We actually have expectations for all our relationships, right? We have expectations about how someone should treat us if we are loved and respected by them. And I'll just speak from my place, right? So when my father would do this really embarrassing stuff in public, or when my mother was hitting me, I was like, they are not meeting my expectations for someone who is supposed to love and care for me. And I just realized when I said that, I want to remove the whole physical abuse element from this because, that's not okay. And so I don't want to have a conversation right now about how accepting is not condoning, although I will say that, but I don't want to make this about like, going down the physical abuse track. Personally, for me, when my mother hit me, it was like, hey, wait a minute, that's not what you do when you love someone. So I interpret it as she doesn't love me, right? And so when we start to realize we have expectations that aren't being met, it doesn't mean that in doing so we're condoning what someone else does by taking ownership of expectations, right? So I don't condone the physical abuse that happened to me. But when I investigate my emotional suffering after the fact, it was like, oh, I had expectations that that's not how my mom should have showed up. And that's what's creating my suffering now. Not in the moment, obviously, when I was being abused, like that was happening in the moment, but the emotional suffering after, wishing that she was a different mom, right? So we have expectations of people we love. And we have expectations of, you show up on time, you don't flake on me, right? If you love me, you would take your meds. If you respected me, you wouldn't say and do those things in public again, right? So we have to acknowledge and investigate, what are our expectations of the people that we choose to be in relationship with, right? We get pissed off when people don't follow our manual of these expectations. When we have close friends, those are usually people that follow our expectations. That's why they're our friends, Some people don't expect friends to do sage clearing ceremonies for them, right? I have friends that do. They meet my expectations of like, hey, this is how we like to show up in the world. This is fun. It's not even a spoken thing often, and we often don't know that we have these expectations until those expectations are broken. Yeah. So, reminding ourselves, oh, so part of this suffering is coming from having expectations for how this person should behave that I'm choosing to care about. And I'm not saying you shouldn't care about those things. I'm just saying acknowledging that you don't have to have those expectations. So the next thing we can do is letting go of our expectations and the idea that things will miraculously change. I always laugh around the holidays when people come back and they're like, oh, my mom, she said this thing again. Why does she keep doing that? And I'm like, because that's who she is. That is how she's showing up. That is how she rolls. Why do we expect her to change? Right? Why do we act like it's such a surprise? Like I just finally realized my dad is going to say embarrassing shit in public. I just got to start expecting it. Once I started expecting it, we'd go to a restaurant. He would say something totally inappropriate to the hostess, and I'd just be like, there he goes. Oh, well. And I just smile. This is my dad. Sorry. Just dismiss it, right? But when I was resisting that he wasn't supposed to do that, right? I mean, like, you're not supposed to say those things or do those things. There was fighting and yelling, and I would lash out at him, and why are you embarrassing me in public? Yada, yada, And then once I accepted, this is what my dad does. This is how he rolls, right? There was so much less tension and so much less fighting and arguments, right? So, in that, with accepting someone as they are, that is also including unconditional love. Now, you can love someone and still have clear boundaries, and I'll go into that in a minute. Unconditional love does not mean letting someone do whatever the fuck they want to you, right? Like, I could still love my mom and say, you don't get to hit me anymore. Like, that's what happened. I was 11 years old, and she was beating up on me, and I finally said, stop it. I will not let you do this to me anymore, right? After that, she didn't hit me anymore. It was fascinating. I was like, damn, I wish I said that earlier. With my dad, it was like, okay, I'm not going to invite him to these types of things because he gets to be him, right? And if I want to love him unconditionally, these are the boundaries also within which it's safe for me to be able to do that. Just because I love him unconditionally doesn't mean I have to say yes to everything. I can say no, right? So then compassion comes in. Okay. We need to remember that when someone is not taking their medications, that when someone is not wanting to get diagnosed, right? They are trying to avoid going to see a provider and start treatment. When someone is lashing out, remember that it's not personal. It may feel deeply personal, just like it felt all about being unlovable when I was a kid, right? When my mother would berate me or when she abused me. I felt that my dad just didn't like me because he would do these embarrassing things, right? But it wasn't personal. When I take a step back, I can see that they are deeply suffering, right? And I find it really helpful to think, wow, it must really suck to feel the way they do. It must really suck to feel the way they do. But remember, we started with self-compassion, right? We started with self-compassion and acknowledging we are suffering. And from that place, we can say, look, and they are suffering too, right? And remember, this is not condoning helpful behavior. Being compassionate does not mean it's okay if you treat me like shit, and it's okay if you hit me, and it's okay if you do these things. That's not what it is. This is about how we can show up as our best selves and not do shit that we regret later in that relationship, right? So we can understand why this might be how they are in the world. The trees, we can see them as trees, right? Then we can get curious about, like, is there anything I can do about it? You know? And some of you have typed, there aren't, right? There's not anything I can do about it, right? Maybe, but if there is, maybe you can let things slide sometimes. Maybe you can tap into your patience a little bit more. Maybe you can help fix something in their house or take them to the beach. One of you had posted that someone you love has tools that they're not using. And from someone who's had depression, right? The pissed me off the most when I had depression was my husband telling me, well, you just need to get out and exercise, and all this shit. And I'm like, no shit. It would be awesome if I could get up and go exercise. But that's not what I feel like doing right now. And it's not just that I'm not in the mood. Like when you have depression, it is like literally hard to like get the fuck up even, right? And so when someone has the tools and they're not tapping into them, there's a reason. So maybe we can say, hey, let's pick 2 tools and I'm going to help you remember to use them, right? But, and I'll kind of circle back to this in a minute. But one of the simplest things we can do is learn to love them, right? Unconditionally. And again, when we love someone unconditionally, it doesn't mean we let them treat us however the fuck they want. We have boundaries around that. I want to read this poem to Hafiz. I read it in the podcast that's dropping tomorrow, but I just wanted to read it because I love it. Admit something. Everyone you see, you say to them, love me. I'm just going to read that line again because I think it's so powerful. Admit something. Everyone you see, you say to them, love me. Of course you do not do this out loud, otherwise someone would call the cops. Still though, think about this great pull in us to connect. Why not become the one who lives with the full moon in each eye that is always saying with that sweet moon language what every other eye in this world is dying to hear? Isn't that beautiful? We're all saying love me, and so is that person that we are struggling with right now in our relationship, right? And this is where we can tap into that power of unconditional love, right? It doesn't just serve the other, it serves you. Remember, this is about how you can show up in the relationship. Adults get to do what they want as long as they're not impinging on someone's physical boundaries, right? And as long as they are not emotionally abusing someone. Adults get to not take their meds if they don't want to. Adults get to not choose to use tools that are offered to them. We can't control that. So how can we show up when that's going on? That's what I really want you to think about as we talk about these things. So let's talk about boundaries, right? This is so important. One is, like let's say we're dating someone with a mental illness. That's a choice, right? Like we can choose to be with that person or not. So if we choose to be in that relationship, then we can practice some of these things we're talking about, and we can create boundaries that help keep us safe and that help make the relationship flourish more in this context where we are not feeling stepped on and they are not feeling like hyper controlled, right? And I encourage you, if you're in a relationship, that it's possible to discuss what those boundaries can be. Like if you start yelling or hitting me, this is what is going to happen. I am going to XYZ. The boundaries are about you, not if you do this, you need to XYZ. Or if you don't change that, then this is going to happen. No, this is about you taking action. What are you going to do if a boundary has been crossed, right? So, like, if the conversation starts escalating, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to let you know I'm going to step out of the room, and then we'll pick up the conversation the next day, right? Now, some of you are in relationship with narcissists or have people you love who have narcissistic personality disorder. By definition, it's very difficult for them to have insight that they are part of any problem. And that's going to be challenging. That's why it's one of the hardest things to treat, right? So then it really becomes all about what you are choosing. You don't have to discuss the boundaries with them. You don't have to tell them it's a boundary. You can just do it, right? Now, children are a different game because we're teaching them how to be in the world, right? Our job is to help them learn how to be in the world. So then we need to call in reinforcements. You can use respite care. You can reach out to organizations that can help teach your kids so it's not just you, right? If you have a child with a mental illness. But boundaries, remember that it's about you. And I encourage you to do these boundaries ahead of time. All right? So think about this. Assuming your loved one's not going to change, assuming that they are going to continue the behaviors. Do you want to maintain a relationship with this person? We're not talking about kids here. Do you want to maintain a relationship with this person? Do you want to have this person in your life still? Then this is the work that needs to happen for your sake, and so that you can show up in a way that you're proud of in this relationship, right? The other thing is to really dial in your self-care practice, right? A meditation practice. You can add a self-compassion practice to your meditation practice. Exercise, getting good sleep. You know, when we take care of ourselves, we have more to offer the other person. I'm trying to read a few of the comments here. Yeah, and you know, when we have mindsets like, okay, things will work out, like what, investigate what you mean by that. Like, do you mean that they're going to change? Because we need to assume that that's not going to happen. Not in a, you know, letting go of hope kind of way. But we can't base our emotional well being on someone else changing in any relationship, right? We need to really tell ourselves, how do I want to show up, assuming this person isn't going to change? In what degree do I want to be involved in this relationship? I longed to be able to invite my dad to everything because I loved him so much, but I knew I couldn't if I wanted to show up the way I wanted to and to maintain our relationship, and I had to draw boundaries, you know. I longed to be close to my mom and to have conversations with her and trust her. And I just couldn't fully, right? And so I had to learn, like, okay, if this is how it's going to be, how do I want to show up so I'm proud in this relationship? And I decided that that was to show up with more compassion, more patience, and more love. Because for me, first, for me, I felt better coming from that place. It felt so much better than rage and regret and resent. Right? And you can choose differently. You can choose to not continue certain relationships. But if you choose to stay in them, we can't expect someone to change. We can only change our response to how they're showing up, right? So, my computer says it's fading. Okay. So, the last thing I want to leave you with is to use the relationship as a spiritual practice, right? When I was 19 and I was studying meditation and I was hanging out at this Buddhist retreat center, Vajrapani Institute in Boulder Creek, I remember there was a book on a bookshelf and it was said, Transforming Problems into Happiness. And I was kind of like, oh, this is like when I was growing up and the preacher said, turn your obstacles into opportunities, right? And when I read the book, I was like, oh no, that is not just what this is saying. It is saying that, and it's saying to be joyful about these challenges because they're helping us grow spiritually. And I was like, holy shit, that I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around. Okay? I was like, I can see how we, can take a hard situation and get something that we've learned from it, but to be joyful about it, like that concept just kind of blew my mind. So I'm not saying that's where you need to go, but I want to show you that that's what's possible. Just plant the seed. Like, what if we had gratitude? Gratitude for this challenge. I had a client I coached, I think it was yesterday, about how to show up in a relationship. She had a challenging relationship with her mom, and now she was moving to the state her mom was in, so she knew she'd have more interaction with her, or she was choosing to start to have more interaction with her, and she was really worried about the challenges that would also bring up. And we talked about making this like you are going into a nunnery now. You are going into a monastery type situation. Let's look at this like, when our person that we're loving is acting out, what if we looked at it as the same way as if we had a spiritual teacher that was challenging us? Because that happens, right? In monasteries, your spiritual teacher gives you challenging questions. You hear about in Zen, you clean the kitchen for hours and hours and hours. You do these really difficult chores. You do this and this. There's something that comes with the hardship and the surrender to this is what is, and this is how it is, and this is where I'm at. And in that surrender, we can find our true nature in there that is loving, compassionate, and wise, right? The name of the book, DK, was Transforming Problems into Happiness. Warning, it's very traditional Tibetan Buddhism, so I'm sure Pema Chodron has written something more hip that speaks to the same thing. but that was my introduction to it, right? That was my introduction to that concept. You might want to check if Pema has written something, unless you're used to the languaging of like totally traditional Tibetan Buddhist texts. But it was helpful to see that there was this entire culture that was, like, hey, let's take these challenges and turn them into spiritual growth. So that's what I invite you to do in this relationship with someone you love. The way you show up as your best self is by looking at it as your spiritual practice. Like in this moment, if my goal is to cultivate my spiritual practice, how would I show up? And when you get frustrated and you blow up and you get pissed and you feel disappointed, self-compassion first, right? Then we can reevaluate. Okay, to what degree do I want to be involved in this relationship? To what degree do I want to create boundaries? How do I want to show up? That's a choice. When I was a kid, I didn't have a choice to be in relationship with my parents. When I turned 18, I got the fuck out and I ran to the Santa Cruz Mountains. And I barely came home. And then that was a choice, right? I'm gone. I'm out of here. I'm going to call you once a month. And then my mom would yell at me when I called, and then I'd hang up, and it felt shitty. Then when I started to meditate and started to practice mindfulness and cultivate compassion, I thought, I really want to see if I can change this. And so I chose to be in relationship with them more closely, right? We have more choice than we think. But I just really want to encourage you, if you're going to let someone in your life who is struggling with this, right? That we can actually take it as a spiritual path. You know, I have a patient, she has 9 special needs kids that she's adopted. And I always look at her like, wow. And she's involved in the community and she does all kinds of shit. And I'm just like, how does she have the bandwidth for that? I have one like easy kid. And she told me, like, well, for her, it's her spiritual practice, right? And so you get to choose, though, what that looks like and what you want to cultivate. But I'm guessing if you're on this call, you want to cultivate being able to come from a place of love and compassion and wisdom. Look, when we are in a place where someone we love has hurt us or embarrassed us, humiliated us, disappointed us deeply, we're in stress mode. And we're like, that's why we lash out and we get frustrated. We feel at risk, right? This is why the self-compassion is so important right at the beginning, because it takes us out of that stress response, that fight, flight, or freeze, and it brings us to a place where we can open up to our highest self, right? It's so important to have self-compassion, because if we don't, and we go through the motions of being a nice person when we're in fight, flight, or freeze mode, it doesn't feel genuine. It burns us out. And the other person can sense it, that they're a burden, that you don't really mean what you say. Like, you're doing all the right things. You're being supportive, but in your heart, you're resentful. They can sense that, and you know the truth of that, right? And I know that's not how any of us want to show up. So we need to offer self-compassion and give it to ourselves until we're ready. Okay? So the pod's going to drop tomorrow where I talk more about this. But that's a taste of it, okay? And if you have any questions, feel free to continue posting in the Rebel Buddhist Facebook group. You can join Freedom School. We'll jam about this however much you want. JoinFreedomSchool.com. And we've got new courses coming up. It's going to be awesome, okay? But if you need more support around this, feel free to post in the Facebook group, and I will get this recording and upload it to the Facebook group as well, okay? All right, y'all. Lots of love to you. Thank you for showing up today. Bye. Look at my cowlicks. They're so strong today. Look like I have little mini horns. You're welcome. You're welcome. Bye. Ooh, let me click here. Ciao, everyone.